Welcome back to St.Andrew's United Church in Edmonton, Alberta. It's a beautiful pre-summer night here in Edmonton, and we're just reflecting on the busy week we've had here with our garden. The garden is now completely planted, and we got all the fencing up around it to keep out the interested critters. And more than that, we've had many interesting conversations with people in the neighborhood who have stopped by when some of us have been out in the garden talking about garlic, for example, and our garlic crop and how that's going to be used. What else is in the garden, how many people it takes to sustain it. And one of the things that, of course, this points to is the totally relational nature of gardening and urban farming. And for that, we're entirely grateful. And the readings today also point us to the relational natureship of discipleship. As Jesus sends out the 12 with very specific instructions, not only on how they are to travel, but what they are to do to build relationships that are going to allow people to recognize the presence of God in their midst. We're glad that you're here. We're glad that you're here to share this time with us, and we hope you find it a transforming time. Let us pray. We pray, surprising God, as you lead us into new experiences, help us to be open to your presence among us and within. Let us sense your glory in the sights and sounds of this summer day. May it be so. Amen.
this morning is taken from Matthew chapter 9, verses 35 and 10 and 8. And then Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the presence of God, and curing every disease and every sickness. And when he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them, because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. And then Jesus summoned his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits, to cast them out and to cure every disease and every sickness. And these 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions. As you go, proclaim the good news. The presence of heaven has come near. Cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. You received without payment, so give without payment. Take no gold or silver or copper in your belts, no bag for your journey, or 2 tunics, or sandals, or a staff, for laborers deserve their food. Whatever town or village you enter, find out who in it is worthy, and stay there until you leave. And as you enter the house, greet it. If the house is worthy, let your peace come upon it. But if it is not worthy, let your peace return to you. If anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, shake off the dust from your feet as you leave that house or town. Truly, I tell you, it will be more tolerable for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment than for that town. As the end of the reading, hear what the Spirit is saying to the church.
Well, under normal circumstances at this time of year, lots of people would be getting ready and be well into the planning of their summer holidays and travel plans. And messages are a little mixed this year because of the pandemic. Some governments want people to travel and want the tourism dollars, but they don't want people to bring the COVID virus with them. So it's very difficult sometimes to know where exactly you're welcome and what you might be welcome doing. The gospel readings this morning also point us down the road of travel. And the instructions that Jesus gives his disciples at first might seem a little puzzling. They are to take nothing with them, no staff, no purse, no second tunic, no money. They're to go to towns and heal the sick, cast out demons, raise the dead, interestingly enough. And if they're not, if their message is not well received, shake the dust off your feet and move on. And there are just all kinds of very deep assumptions that are built into those words of Jesus that sometimes get a little overlooked. One of them is the reason why Jesus is sending them out in the first place. And Matthew makes it clear that Jesus is been out teaching and healing himself, and realizes that the people, in the words of the gospel, are harried and like sheep without a shepherd, and Jesus has compassion on them. And those of us who think we know anything about Jesus might assume that in that situation, Jesus being just like us, he would leap into the fray and say, I will be their shepherd, and I will tell people what to do, and I will look after people. And of course, because we think we know what Jesus is going to do, he does exactly the opposite. And it's not he that takes on that role. He delegates it to the apostles. And he tells them to go out and do the things that he's been doing. And in that instruction, there's a tremendous amount of trust that Jesus has in the disciples that they can do it. And you may have been yourself in the position where somebody has seen something in you that they thought would be really good leadership or a really good skill for a particular project, or you were just needed in a certain place, and your first response was, no way, there's no way that I can do that. But nevertheless, somebody has seen something in you that perhaps you haven't seen in yourself, and you give it a try, and goodness knows where it goes from there. And so Jesus has all the confidence in his apostles, his disciples, that they can fulfill the requirements and the requests that he is making of them, that they have everything that they need. And the message that they are to take, too, is not one of trying to convince people of anything, or not by words at least, or not to change opinions or to change minds. And you've probably had the experience of being at home on a Sunday morning or a Saturday morning and hearing a knock at the door, and there standing on your doorstep is often a man and sometimes a child with them and a magazine in hand, and they want to tell you something about Jesus. Or sometimes the knock comes from two young, very well-scrubbed young men in white shirts and backpacks who also want to tell you something about Jesus and why you should believe them. And how do you respond to that? I mean, whenever I have conversations with people about that, people seem to respond in different ways. Some people say, thank you, no, I'm quite happy with what I've got. Other people will engage them in conversation. Other people will just slam the door in their faces. But when that kind of invitation is presented to you to hear something, you know that people have an agenda. And oftentimes what it's going to lead to, if you do engage, is a debate. And at the moment, we're finding out exactly how difficult that kind of conversation can be as we debate the understanding of what systemic racism looks like, or even if it is a thing, or what it means. And one of the difficulties that many of us come from coming out of a liberal education is that understanding that if we can marshal all the facts that we need and have better facts than our opponents, we will win the day and change minds. And so when conversations, very difficult conversations, have to happen, oftentimes people will go to authorities like the Bible, like their own tenets of belief, and try to convince one another of the rightness of their position. And of course, you'll know again from your own experience, that really goes nowhere. People just dig in and begin talking over. And the reality is our minds rarely are changed by the rational arguments of others. And there has to be a deep understanding of the personal experience that we bring to whatever subject it is at hand, whether it's the subject of racism, whether it's the subject of police brutality, whether it's the subject of oppression of any kind. And I remember one of my own personal experiences of that when I was in Toronto and working with a refugee organization, and we had just received into our midst a young man from El Salvador who had been sheltered by another organization in Harlingen, Texas, and had come right from there to Canada. His parents had been killed by the military in El Salvador, and he had been hunted by them until he was able to get out. And we were walking down Yonge Street in Toronto one night, and all of a sudden the police cruisers went screaming around the corner with sirens blaring and lights flashing. And Carlos literally shrunk right up against the wall in order not to be seen. And that came right out of his own experience of what it meant to hear the police coming in his country. It meant they were coming for somebody, and most likely they were coming for somebody like him. And there was no way that I was going to be able to convince him by a rational argument that at the time, police in Toronto were not there to persecute him or to hunt him down. They were there, as it said on their cars, to serve and protect. And that was my perspective. That was the one I wanted to share with him, but I knew that that perspective could only be gained by him beginning to open up and trust a little. There was nothing I could say that would make that happen for him. So we're left to wonder then, well, how are we going to get people on side or change people's minds or have the conversation at all? And are there any examples, like those disciples going out and just being with people, listening to people, talking with people, not trying to convince them that they needed to change their minds, but that there was something among them already that they could recognize and that would change their lives as well. Parker Palmer, the Quaker educator, tells the story of John Woolman. John Woolman was a Quaker in New Jersey 100 years before the Civil War, who had it laid on his heart, as he put it, by God, that slavery was wrong. Now, the Quakers don't make decisions by majority vote. They make them by consensus. And John Woolman had a very, very difficult time convincing his colleagues and his community that God really did not want people to be enslaved. They couldn't agree on what to do, but they also could not turn their backs on the integrity of John Woolman. And so the Quaker community agreed that they would support his family while he traveled up and down the eastern seaboard preaching his message against slavery, and that they would listen. And that's exactly what he did. So for 20 years, John Woolman went up and down the eastern seaboard. He refused to wear dyed clothes because the dye was made by slaves. When he was staying in people's homes, he would not eat at the table if it was served by slaves or servants. And because of his persistence and his conversations, it took 20 years, but the Quakers were the first organization and group in the United States to abolish slavery 80 years before the American Civil War. And they did it without bloodshed, and they did it as a community. We often think that that kind of community building, or that kind of relational trust building, is an inefficient way to make decisions. But when you think of the way that the Quakers did it, and then you think of the way that the larger American society did it, it seems pretty efficient by comparison. And of course, there's no way that we can make decisions on the national level or make policy by doing what John Woolman did. But the point of the gospel story is not only do the disciples go out with the trust of Jesus, but Jesus also has trust that there are going to be people who are going to host them and listen to their message, and maybe even to host them even if they don't agree with what the disciples are saying or what the disciples are doing. But nevertheless, they are going to offer that hospitality to a new understanding that the kingdom or the realm of God is among them. And that they are just as important to the work and the ministry of Jesus and the disciples as Jesus and the disciples are. So in this time of great polarity and great divide, and many people saying we need to have a conversation, perhaps the church can be just as much like those people and places that hosted the apostles and listened to the message and gave them comfort and gave them support, even if what they were hearing at first was strange and not particularly comprehensible to them. Because we do, as the church, have a long history of hosting ideas, hosting people that were at first very unpopular by the larger culture. But by that hosting and by that building of relationship, we're able to transform what seemed to be radical ideas or thoughts that were beyond the pale into a way of being that are inclusive, respective of diversity, and perhaps most importantly, respective of the integrity of those who hold them. And as Jesus sends out those disciples to heal the sick and cast out demons, perhaps we need to be on the lookout for those people who are coming to do exactly that in our midst. And so for the hospitality that we may be able to offer in this time of conversation, and for the wisdom that will be generated by it, thanks be to God. Amen. Let us pray. You send us out, our God, like sheep among wolves, to be as wise as serpents and harmless as doves. And in the middle of those paradoxes, we find the true essence of our being, that we are not one or the other, but we are all. We are those who are harried and like sheep without a shepherd. And we are those with the strength to go out and help others see the way the realm of God, your realm, has been close to us. We give you thanks for the capacity that you place within each one of us to be in relationship with those whom we love, those who are different from us, those who we do not understand, and those whose experience we may not comprehend. We give you thanks for the diversity of voices and people that populate our lives and our communities and our being, the chances that we have to learn from one another about what it means to be truly human and what it means to be in an evolving and a transforming community. We give you thanks for this time and this season of lengthening days and of sunlight, the chance to be out of doors, to be close to nature. We give you thanks for the possibility to be in gardens and among flowers and trees, near water and all the things that restore our souls and our spirits. We remember in our prayers this day those who are in isolation and those who are restricted physically from human contact. We remember those for whom this is a difficult time of anxiety, wondering about the future, about employment, about school, about those family members who are far away. We remember in our prayers those who are hungry. We remember those who need for their dead to be raised, the deadness or the dead ideas that they have put to rest, the hopes and the dreams that they once had that are in need of resurrection. We remember ourselves at this time and the ways in which we are asked to host the new, to entertain the impossible, and to dream what might yet be, and to dream that in a community of people who are of like mind, but unlike mind as well. And now, O God, as we prepare to go into a new week, may we go knowing that your Spirit goes with us and before us and surrounds us, and that whoever we may encounter, and whoever may encounter us, may find something of you in themselves and in our relation. And now, O God, we offer you the silent prayers of our hearts and of our minds.
Guide me, O the great Jehovah, pilgrim through this barren land. I am weak, but thou art mighty. Hold me with thy powerful hand. Bread of heaven, feed me till the morn. Feed me till my heart open now the crystal fountain, whence the healing stream doth flow. Let the fire and cloudy pillar lead me on my journey through. Strong deliverer, be us to much strength and shield. Be us to much strength and shield. I tread the verge of Jordan, bid my anxious feet subside. Death of death and hell's destruction, let me safe on Canaan's side. Songs of praises, all together we proclaim. All
All these things we ask in the name of the one who still teaches us to pray by singing. Go out into the world with a daring and a tender love, and go in peace. The world is waiting. And whatever you do, do it for love in the name of Jesus, who is with us on the way. And now may the grace of Jesus the Christ, the love of God, and the communion and the compassion of the Holy Spirit be among us this day and forever. Amen.